We've got a compliant right side of the room here, and a rebellious left side. Yeah. The good and the bad, the right and the left. All right, guys, this has been fun. I want to be respectful of your time, and I love the examples, I love the comments and the questions. In this next portion, I think we're gonna move through it, unless it's something you just can't resist. You have to say it, then we'll let you. But we're gonna just try to move through this next one. We're gonna record this one and try to get through some of this interesting stuff. And so, thanks for your comments. I'm not trying to discourage them, but I'm wanting to get through it in the interest of time, just to plow through some of this stuff. Plus, I don't have to be grilled and feel like I don't know what I'm talking about. When it's just me talking, I'm right? No one can question. I like that better. Okay, let's see if this thing works. Still doesn't. Okay. All right, so we've set a foundation. Hopefully you've set a constitutional foundation about some things we're going to talk about. And now we're going to go into something called Agenda 21. It's a current threat to property rights. How many of you have heard about Agenda 21? Good. And those of you who haven't, you're in for some fun here. Agenda 21 is the ultimate conspiracy theory, okay? It's been a conspiracy theory for 20 years, except that it's been conspiracy fact, the challenge. The state of Alabama passed a bill last year, said, Senate Bill 477, we reject UN Agenda 21. Texas, South Dakota, Virginia, Missouri all currently have bills. Our own Representative Yagi in the House out of Evanston or out of Lyman tried to introduce, but he couldn't get it through the LSO, an anti-Agenda 21 bill. The Republican National Convention officially recognizes and rejects Agenda 21 and the platform of the Republican State Party in Wyoming. And there's also the Democrats, there's a group called Democrats Against Agenda 21. So this is bipartisan, it's many, many states, national level, state level, recognizing Agenda 21 as a real thing. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's a real thing. Okay, so we're going to get into what it is. We're going to find out how it affects us and then what I can do about it, okay? In 2 words, Agenda 21 is environmentalism hijacked. Anybody here like the environment? Sure, we want to take care of the environment? Yes. But it's been hijacked. It's been hijacked for decades now. Because whenever we hear of environmentalism now, we think of progressivism. We think of liberalism, right? We think of that type of control. Because it's been hijacked by the UN Agenda 21. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to establish some facts about Agenda 21 so you know what it is. We're not going to talk about, well, this is what I think. We're going to talk about from the proponent, those who support and advocate Agenda 21, find out what they say. And that'll give us an idea of what Agenda 21 is, okay? It happened back in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. There are about 35,000, reportedly 35,000 people who showed up to this. Local, state, national, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, tons and tons of people, and of course a lot of media showed up to this, and they called it the Earth Summit, okay? And out of the Earth Summit came UN Agenda 21, a thick, thick document. And we've seen in recent years, when you get these thick, thick documents, they really don't just appear in a week or two. They've been there for a long time just waiting for the right moment, right? The same thing with Agenda 21. Now we're going to establish some facts, like I said here, and we're going to go to some original source. I want to show you who these original sources are briefly, and then I'm going to be quoting from these original sources. And once again, these are the advocates of Agenda 21, so we get it from the horse's mouth. What's Agenda 21, according to them? And then we can reject or agree with it, but it's not going to be my opinion. It's going to be them saying it. The first thing is ICLEI. ICLEI is alive and well, according to some sources, and what I've looked at a little bit here in Jackson, with the only town in Wyoming that has some ICLEI involvement. It was originally called International Council for the Local Environmental Initiatives, but in 2005 they changed that name because too many people were saying, why do we want international control of our local things going on? So they said, oh, now it's just ICLEI, and it doesn't mean anything, it's just ICLEI, I-C-L-E-I, and we're going to call it Local Governments for Sustainability. Still the same international organization, but they're calling it local, okay? So obviously they're not stupid, they know how to work through this. 1992 is the Earth Summit, UN Agenda 21. President George Bush Sr. signed this. Didn't sign it into law, it's not a treaty, it's simply some soft law, and he signed it. Okay, so you have a Republican who signed it, and what's going on here? No one could get their hands on the Agenda 21, the actual huge legalese, right? But they had a man named Daniel Saitars in 1993 who was an environmentalist lawyer who they said, yeah, you go ahead and write a brief summary. So he wrote a book called Agenda 21. So this is the compact version of Agenda 21. In 1993, who was our president? President Clinton formed the President's Council on Sustainable Development. The UN, obviously, they're the founders of Agenda 21, the advocates. They produced a booklet called Global Biodiversity in 1996, and in 1998, a book called Sustainable America. This is written once again by Daniel Saitar, the same guy who wrote the 1993 book. And if you can see right here, the foreword is by Al Gore. Okay, so you get an idea of what may be in this. Now, like I said, we're going to get from the horse's mouth. Okay, this is what they have to say about Agenda 21. First of all, Agenda 21 proposes an array of actions which are intended to be implemented by every person on Earth. Okay, we're talking about international control of every person on Earth. This is interesting. UN's Biodiversity Treaty. Nature has an integral set of different values, cultural, spiritual, and material, where humans are one strand of nature's web and all living creatures are considered equal. All living creatures are considered equal. Interesting. Therefore, the natural way is the right way, and human activity should be molded along nature's rhythms. So the UN's clarified that I'm equal to a mosquito. I didn't understand that, but they've luckily clarified that for us. Okay? All living creatures are considered equal. There are specific actions which are intended to be undertaken by multinational corporations and entrepreneurs, by financial institutions and individual investors, by high-tech companies and indigenous people, by workers and labor unions, by farmers and consumers, by students and schools, by governments and legislators, by scientists, by women, by children, in short, by every person on Earth. So are the advocates of Agenda 21 serious about governing every single person? Very serious. They're not messing around. Now, ICLEI has a vice chairman named Harvey Rubin. He says this: individual rights will have to take a backseat to the collective. Was America formed on collectivism or individualism? Individualism. And when you have the vice president, the vice chairman of ICLEI saying, oh, that whole individual thing has to take a backseat to collective. That's the only way we can save the earth. I don't know. Better not sit well with you. You're in the wrong room if that sits well with you. Okay, Maurice Strong, an avowed communist. Okay, communism is equality for everyone, right? Unfortunately, there's some that are more equal than others because he's a multi-millionaire. Done pretty well with communism. He says this: current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class involving high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and work air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable. Notice who he is. He's the Secretary General of the UN Earth Summit. If any one person is Agenda 21, it's him. And what's he saying? You can't live how you normally live. To which we say, go ahead, Mr. Strong, show us the way. Right?
Sell all the water in the aquifer in Preston also.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
So he has a history of issues where you look at this and say it's not about the environment. If you can convince people that the earth and the environment is about to crumble, then what the real issue is about control, isn't it? It's not about the environment, it's about control. Because people say, well, the environment's going to tumble. Well, sure, take my freedoms and do this. That's what it's about. Now, this quote, he's also the chairman of or the founder of the UN Environment Program, and this quote is really disturbing. It's by Maurice Strong as well. Isn't the only hope for the planet that the industrialized civilizations collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring that about? Okay? Now, if I had said that, you say, no one would say something that stupid. Well, he's the one who said it. Luckily, we're quoting him, and you can get mad at him and not at me. He really said that. The advocate of Agenda 21 says we've got to destroy, the only hope for the planet is to destroy industrialized civilizations. Interesting. Okay? And all this is based on fraudulent science, right? Because we've had climate gate, we've had all these different things that prove that these things really aren't happening. The environment really isn't on the brink of destruction. Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of all human society unlike anything the world has ever experienced. A major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals, and an unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources. This shift will demand that a concern for the environmental consequences of every human action be integrated into individual and collective decision-making at every level. Okay? Usually I make some comments about that. We're going to move on. The UN wants to chime in here. They say property rights are not absolute and unchanging, but rather a complex, dynamic, and shifting relationship between two or more parties over space and time. That to me sounds like Star Trek. Dynamic, shifting, complex. They're not absolute and unchanging. You think you own property, but you don't absolutely own it. It could change. It could change sometime. Wait a second. All the way back in 1976, the UN issued this report of habitat and said land, because of its unique nature and the crucial role it plays in human settlements, cannot be treated as an ordinary asset, controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. An inefficient market, what's that? Last time I checked, markets are efficient unless the government involves themselves in it. That's the whole point of a market. A market is, by definition, efficient. Okay? And land can't be controlled by the inefficient private market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of the accumulation and concentration of wealth. Yes, it is. And therefore contributes to social injustice. Social justice says, look, it's the right and opportunity of all people to benefit equally from the resources afforded us by society and the environment. Private property is a social injustice because some people own it and some people don't. And that's not fair. Therefore, no one should own property. Everyone should own it. And that's how you become socially just. Everyone owns property. Marxism. Okay? If unchecked, if private property goes unchecked, it may become a major obstacle in the planning and implementation of development schemes. Yep, you better believe it. My private property will get in the way of your development schemes, your planning schemes, because it's my private property. Okay? Now, these are not new ideas. They're old, bad ideas. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so. That's just what we intend. The middle-class owner of property must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. Don't forget, plank number 1 of the Communist Manifesto is abolition of property and land, and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Okay? These are not new ideas. These are old ideas that are bad and are rearing their head again under the label of UN Agenda 21. I'll cruise through these. This one's simply saying we need to stabilize vehicle miles. There's a local Agenda 21 in California that says cars are not a sustainable mode of transportation. There's U.S. population control. We need to reduce the rate of population. I'm just popping through these really quick. They're saying we need to get into the curricula of the schools. We need to teach them sustainable development. Back in my MBA program in 2001, all of a sudden we're talking about sustainability. I'm like, what is this sustainability thing? It's all over in every class I go to. It's getting into the schools, isn't it?
You just keep changing the name.
Yep, and we'll get into that, the changing of names, the semantics. J. Gary Lawrence, who's the advisor on President Clinton's Council on Sustainable Development, says this: participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many of the conspiracy-fixated groups and individuals in our society. This segment of our society who fear one world government. Anyone here fear one world government? Yes. And a UN invasion of the United States through which our individual freedom would be stripped away would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined that conspiracy by undertaking local Agenda 21. So he says, we got a problem. When we tie this to the UN or we tie this to Agenda 21, people are going to see this, and all these, he calls them conspiracy theorists, I call them freedom lovers, see this, they're going to say, that's wrong, UN, no, they're not good. What are we going to do about this problem? He said, that's easy, here's what we need to do. We call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. Because after all, no one wants dumb growth. We want smart growth, right? So you use these words that people say, yeah, that sounds better. Comprehensive planning, we all want to plan, of course. Yeah, that makes sense. That's what we do. Okay, so there's some of your quotes. There's some of your original source quotes from the advocates of Agenda 21. So those of you who don't know what Agenda 21 is, now you know a little bit better. We're going to ask some of the reporter questions. What is it? Well, UN Agenda 21 is a United Nations worldwide program. Who? It's intended to affect every single person on Earth, right? Why? Well, to save the planet through sustainability. Where? It's all across the planet, but the real issue of Agenda 21 is in every locality. That's where they're coming at us. When? In the 21st century, that's why it's called Agenda 21. And how? Major shift in priorities, collective rights dominate individual rights, private property limits, population control, equality among all living creatures, individual liberty restrictions, limits on miles driven, air conditioning use, etc. Now, if that had been the first slide I'd stuck up on Agenda 21, you would have said, that sounds like a conspiracy theory. But this is them saying, this is what we like about Agenda 21. This is what we think is good about it. And so you go, that isn't good. We reject that, don't we? This is a rejection of what the truths are. Now, this is an interesting thing. I've spent a lot of time studying the United Nations, a ton of time. And I've come to the absolute conclusion that it's really the United Nations versus God. Because I think they say, look, you either believe in God or you play God. Either he's in charge and makes the rules, or government's in charge and makes the rules. Either he provides or government provides. And the United Nations says, we're in charge, we make the rules, we give rights, and you do whatever we say. Okay? It's pretty interesting. They've got volumes and volumes and volumes of books and articles and documents and all kinds of research to prove the falsity of this one simple statement, right, from the Bible. God said unto them, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So in one simple biblical phrase, it debunks this whole mountain, voluminous group of books, etc., that are trying to say, oh, no, no, no. No, we're the ones that give rights. We're the ones that tell you you can and can't do your property. And the Bible says, well, no, you're a steward over the land. You are to have children. You will be held accountable for how you treat your private property. Government says, the United Nations says, no, no, you're accountable to us. We'll tell you what to do. Okay, now good intentions. We should try to save the planet, shouldn't we? Sure, yeah. Shouldn't we be wise stewards over the earth's limited resources? Yeah. What about the plants, the animals, the lakes and streams? Who's going to take care of them? And we start to look at these good intentions, and too often we get tricked into, so just because something has a good intention or a good reason for being there doesn't mean government should get involved. And in fact, in most cases, if something's good, the way to keep it good is leave it in private hands, not to make government get involved with it. Okay? Daniel Webster said a really interesting comment. I like how he says this. It's hardly too strong to say that the Constitution was made to guard the people against the dangers of good intentions. There are men in all ages who mean to govern well, but they mean to govern. They promise to be good masters, but they mean to be masters. And this quote, I think, has particular application to Agenda 21. Most of the major ills of the world have been caused by well-meaning people who ignored the principle of individual freedom, except as applied to themselves, who are obsessed with fanatical zeal to improve the lot of mankind and the masses through some pet formula of their own, a formula called socialism or communism or Agenda 21. The harm done by ordinary criminals, murderers, gangsters, and thieves is negligible in comparison with the agony inflicted upon human beings by the professional do-gooders who attempt to set themselves up on earth as gods on earth, and who would ruthlessly force their views on all others with the abiding assurance that the end justifies the means. In a nutshell, I see that as being the advocates of Agenda 21. We know, and we've got it figured out. Don't worry. We'll use our freedom. You don't. We're smarter than you. We're altruistic. We'll take care of you. We'll decide. We'll make decisions about private property. Okay? Alexander Hamilton makes an interesting point. He asks this question, has it been found that bodies of men act with more rectitude or greater selflessness than individuals? When we're in a group, you heard of groupthink? When you're in high school and say, hey, let's go throw pumpkins at mailboxes. You would never do that as an individual. But as a group, you're like, there's 25 of us. Why not? The answer is, of course, we act less rationally in groups, don't we? He says, regard to reputation has a less active influence when the infamy of a bad action is to be divided among a number than when it is to fall singly upon one. It's very, very true. And the point, the tie-in I'm making here, it may be a stretch. I don't think it's a stretch, but it may be, is all of you here own millions of acres of grassland and parks and reserves, etc. Did you know that? You all own millions of them, right? Because the federal government is us, people. When's the last time you went and checked on that to make sure it looked nice or make sure the beetle wasn't ruining all the pine trees? Why haven't you done that? It's yours. The reason you haven't is because it's all of ours. And when something's all of ours, it's none of ours. The best way to protect the environment is let private citizens own it, because no one has a better incentive to take care of it, to reflect their own personal values in it, to improve its value and use than someone who owns it. Okay? And so don't collectively own it, or else no one does. Individually own it, and then someone cares, and then that's how you protect the environment. You put it in the hands of private individuals, have a normal, natural, free market incentive to take care of their land. Okay?
Yeah, I agree.
That wasn't a stretch? That was all right?
I do agree.
Okay. James Madison, there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. Little by little. That's how government and tyranny always works, okay? Is what's happening in particular with UN Agenda 21. Because what if our UN friends marched down the streets of Jackson like this? We'd reject that, outright reject that, wouldn't we? No way. Not the UN, here, not supreme here. But if they come in little by little through the back door, and we'll talk about how that's happening here in Jackson, then that's when we don't see it. We don't notice it. Gradual and silent encroachments.
Big brother.
Yep. Okay, so how does Agenda 21 affect me? Well, quite honestly, if you don't mind someone telling you how many miles you can drive or how many kids you can have or what you can do with your private property, then it really doesn't affect you. Don't worry about it. But if you don't want the government to tell you every little thing you can and can't do, then there's no way it doesn't affect you. The advocates of Agenda 21 say, look, this is soft law, relax. This isn't a treaty. It's not binding. Okay, and they point to these quotes and say, look, it's just intended. Intended again. It's a major effort. If you don't want to join us, don't worry about it. You don't have to join us. We're just moving towards stabilization, right? And they say, look, this is just a movement. We're just working together. Don't get all wound up. But whenever you use government, government is what? Force, okay? Washington says government is force. It's not reason, it's not eloquence, it's force. So when government is used, it's force. All right? And so we're going to look at some of these quotes again and look more closely. Require, does that sound like soft law or hard law? Yeah. What about demand? Okay, government is force. And the UN says, look, rights and freedoms, this is really interesting. Article 29, Clause 3 of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Every once in a while they say very clearly what they do and what they think and what their philosophy is. They say rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. So according to the UN, who gives us our rights? They do. And if they give us our rights, they can take them away.
They can't even talk to each other. How can they take them?
Yes, there's some challenges there. This is diametrically opposed. I like to point out that it's not only diametrically opposed to the Declaration, which says our rights come from God and we respect man's rights, but it's diabolically opposed. Because the UN doesn't recognize God or man's rights, and the Declaration of the United States of America recognizes God and man's rights. Okay? So there's nothing, their version of government is not of protecting God-given rights, it's of granting UN-decided rights. Okay? Different. Now, get into the Constitution a little bit here, the Supremacy Clause, Article 6. What is it about UN Agenda 21 that's not constitutional, besides what we've talked about in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, besides the Fifth Amendment? Where else does it violate the Constitution? Well, quite simply in the Supremacy Clause, right? The Constitution and the laws of the United States shall be made in pursuance thereof, and later on it says shall be the supreme law of the land. Our supreme law of the land is the Constitution. Not a UN resolution, not a UN anything. Our supreme law of the land is the Constitution. That's what governs us. Now, one of my pet peeves is when someone says that's constitutional or that's not constitutional, and then they just leave it at that. Well, if it is or it isn't, then you should be able to point to the Constitution. UN Agenda 21 is not constitutional because it violates Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3. And it says, no state shall, without the consent of Congress, enter into any agreement or compact with a foreign power. Is UN Agenda 21 an agreement with a foreign power? Yes, therefore it violates the Constitution. The last part of Article 6 talks about treaties. Now, the UN Agenda 21 isn't a treaty. It was never even attempted to become a treaty because I don't think there was enough support. Okay? But in case anyone ever gets the idea that UN treaties are binding, they only are if they are made under, it says right here, all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. A UN treaty is only binding when it's under the authority of the United States. What's the authority of the United States? And what it says, mostly in Article 1, Section 8, almost always the external duties, like declaring war, international commerce, making peace, those external things. So if a treaty is supposed to be between one entity and another, and how they meet in the middle, how they interact in the middle, what if a treaty says, here's what you'll do inside your state? That's outside of the authority of the United States. We talked about the gun control laws, right? Those things that tell people what to do inside the United States are called laws. And laws are made by Congress, not by the UN. Okay? So in case someone says, oh, it's a treaty, let's say UN Agenda 21 became a treaty, it wouldn't be a legitimate constitutional treaty because it's done outside of the authority of the United States. Okay? So, Jefferson says, in questions of power then, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. In other words, don't just trust government officials to do what's have our best interests at heart, or say, well, that makes sense, or that seems good, just let them do it. No, what they can and can't do is outlined in the Constitution. Don't just trust someone. Say, well, my city councilor, my county commissioner, I'm sure they have my best interests at heart. Not according to Jefferson. Jefferson says, no. Understand and hold them accountable to the Constitution. Okay, here's where we're going to get into the Teton County Comp Plan. What can I do about it? We can talk about Agenda 21 all day long and say how bad it is and what violations of the Constitution and principles of freedom it violates, but what can I do about it is the real issue, isn't it? What can I actually do about this thing? What do we do? Well, I would propose that there's 3 steps. The 3 steps are educate yourself, understand what Agenda 21 is, inform others, because it's a numbers game. You need more and more people, so it doesn't just sound like a conspiracy theory. It sounds like something legitimate, because it is. And then become active in the solutions. Those 3 things are what we need to do. And we're going to spend some time here educating ourselves. Okay? So step number 1 is educate yourself. I would suggest that knowing the organizations, the key players in Agenda 21 is critical. Okay, and we're not going to read through this one, but the federal government, there's a lot of entities in the federal government. I need to be very clear with the organizations and all the different groups I'm going to talk about here. Does that mean if someone works for EPA, they're evil and they're bad and they're part of the UN Agenda 21 conspiracy? No. I mean, if someone works for a local organization or is elected, no, I'm not saying that. I want that to be very clear. People who work in government entities aren't by default bad because they're associated with a certain organization. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that Agenda 21 comes through these channels. Okay? We won't read through that, like I said, but let me show you a little picture that shows up often in a lot of the UN Agenda 21 documentation. You got the social, economic, and environment, how they interact. Right in the middle there is sustainable. Whether socially and environmentally it's bearable or equitable or viable, sustainability, okay, is the intersecting of all those. You'll find this little diagram very often in a lot of UN Agenda 21 comp plans, etc. And something similar to this is in the Teton County comp plan. It's right there. Let me show you a quick little slide here. In June 2011, there's an executive order from President Obama. He says we're going to need to streamline and improve the effectiveness of federal programs serving rural America. Through smarter government, we can do even more to improve outcomes and lower costs for the American taxpayer. Okay? Engage stakeholders, including farmers, ranchers, and local citizens on issues and solutions in rural communities. The Rural Council will create and coordinate opportunities for direct dialogue between the administration and rural America. Since when does the administration have anything to do with, or to say with, or communicate with us about our local issues? Constitutionally, they don't. Okay? Promote and coordinate private sector partnerships. The Rural Council will find new ways for government to partner with private organizations in solving shared problems and develop new, innovative models of partnership. When you have public and private working together, public exists to protect rights. Private exists, in most cases, to earn a profit. When you merge those 2 together, what are you doing? You're causing some problems because you combine the force of government with the profit motive, and you're working together, scratching each other's backs, and you have this private partnership, with private-public partnership, and there's a challenge there. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay? At the state level, you have these different groups. Once again, someone who's on the planning and zoning, does that mean they're evil and wicked? No. It means UN Agenda 20 with their little, small, and iterative steps to get involved, they're going through these back doors, through these organizations. Okay? Okay, just to reiterate the point here, city councils, planning and zoning, and county commissioners are the target of Agenda 21. Most often, they're the target, and most often they're the victim, not the enemy. Okay? They're doing what they think is best for the community. Why would they not take these federal grants? Why would they not take these strings attached? Why would they not take these comprehensive plans? They've bought into the fuzzy, feel-good dialogue of those who want and need government authority to implement their plans and infringe on private property rights. They are not the enemy. Those who are deceiving them in your community are the enemy. Okay? It's important to understand that. I've met many city councilmen. I spent a lot of time with county commissioners across the state and talked to them, good men and women, great men and women. And they're on our side, and yet sometimes they are implementing Agenda 21, or whether you want to call it Agenda 21 or simply violating private property rights. It's critical that we don't attack them. They're not wrong. They're not doing anything wrong. They're involved in something that's wrong, and it's our job to educate them and enlighten them and help them understand, oh, yeah, you're right, we shouldn't do that. But to go out with guns a-blazing, that's not the right answer. That's never to create enemies. We've got to create friends, people on the same side. Okay, so I think that's important. Hopefully that's a point I'm making strongly there. Now, here's the game plan, okay? Here's a generic game plan. So first of all, we know the organizations that are involved. Now we want to know the game plan, how it works. Private market controls the property valuation, ownership, and use, right? That's just kind of natural law. That's how it happens. Well, the government comes along and offers a better solution to the private market with nice sounding objectives. We're going to have social justice, so, okay. All stakeholders meet to determine the new comprehensive government plan. Okay, because the government says we want to do this, and they get stakeholders. And I don't know if this has happened in your community, but it has happened in other communities throughout the state. The stakeholders are personally invited. Okay, so only certain stakeholders get to come and make the plan for the county. Like I said, I don't know if that's happened here, but it has happened in other counties. Now, these plans are mandated with the force of law. All of a sudden, it was the private, and now it's the government and the stakeholders who mandate this new plan, has the force of law behind it. And what happens to the private property rights? They're subject to the new plan. Okay? That's a general game plan. We're going to go through how the comprehensive plan here in Teton County does that. Even more general is simply this. You can't really see that. It's supposed to be a string right here. This is the game plan. There's always the game plan, right? Follow the money. Okay? That carrot, what color is it?
Green.
Green, yep. Money, okay? Follow the money. That's the game plan. In general, we're going to give you money, and what comes with that money? Strings, always. Okay? Now, here's a more specific game plan. I'm not saying that this game plan has specifically occurred in any one location, because I'm going to point out some specific organizations at the state and local level. I don't know. But they have been involved in different levels, okay? So, theoretically, the President's Council on Sustainable Development recommends a process and a regulatory framework for a federally funded initiative like comprehensive plans. Okay, so this White House Rural Council or the President's Council on Sustainable Development says, hey, let's get some framework out there, some money and some regulatory framework to have comprehensive plans implemented throughout every county in America. Now the USDA says, okay, we'll take that money and we'll make a grant available through the Rural Community Development Initiative to develop comprehensive plans. In other words, here's your money, here's your carrot, if you develop a comprehensive plan. Okay? For instance, one organization like the Wyoming Rural Development Council, they organize and resources to acquire federal money. There's money out there, guys. We need to organize so we can get that money. NGOs, non-government organizations like WyoPass, work with the Wyoming Rural Development Council to organize visioning meetings. Now, why would WyoPass, go ahead.
WyoPass, I don't know that acronym.
It was back in the previous slide. I'm not sure exactly what. Okay, believe it or not, we only have 4 slides left, but this slide's kind of long and fun, so we'll enjoy it. Know their tactics. That's the last thing that I suggest what you need to know is you need to know their tactics, their organization, their terms, and the plan and their tactics. Anybody heard of the Delphi technique?
Yes.
Delphi technique is arriving at a predetermined outcome that you believe you came up with on your own. Casper City sent me a survey about a year ago now, and they said, hey, we value your opinion as a citizen of Casper, and we want to know what you think about our city. And they said on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the ease of walking in Casper? So when me and fellow citizens rate it as 1, they're going to say, the people have spoken, we need more walkability. We need to start confiscating the frontal property of these owners downtown so we can make a better walkable landscape.
They gotta shut the wind down first.
Yeah. And what if me and my fellow Casperites say 10? We like the walkability. They're going to say the people have spoken. We need to make the city more walkable. Delphi technique. I think I came up with it on my own. I value that they value my opinion. What happened? It was already a predetermined outcome, wasn't it? Okay?
Yep.
Yes?
How are they coming along with their downtown redevelopment plan? I totally forgot about that.
With Casper? Question is, how are they coming along? Very well, depending on which side you're on. If you're on the big government side, they're coming along very well. Millions and millions of dollars of spending on downtown and wiping out, expanding a road from 2 lanes to 4 lanes in the middle of downtown and wiping out houses. And
But they're not affecting anybody's private life.
yeah. Those are just theoretical houses that theoretical people live in. Okay, so there are hundreds of community meetings. Ed's been to a few of them. Anyone else been to hundreds of those community meetings? Or did you even know about them? There's a challenge. Sometimes those community meetings are advertised as community or public, and you have to do some real digging to figure out when they are and what is going on in them. Okay? I looked up who was on, there's some boards. There's a stakeholder advisory board, there's a technical advisory board, and the great majority of them are government employees or people who have a direct benefit from planning the use of property? Okay, is there a conflict of interest? I say there may be. There may be that if what I decide here will affect my very job, my very existence, then there may not be a perspective there. Now, I don't know. I don't know who the people are. Obviously, it has to do with the individual character and morality of each individual on the planning and zoning or city council or county commission, etc. But the Delphi technique is definitely in use. And those good people who are involved there sometimes are victimized by the Delphi technique. They feel like, well, they're listening to me. I'm being part of this process when really the predetermined outcome was already decided beforehand. Okay? Let me get my notes up here. The next thing is called visioning. Okay? Visioning is fine and dandy until a group of people are visioning my private property. Okay? Let me give you some interesting, here's a quote. I only read, there's like, I think hundreds of pages on this comp plan. I only read the first, I think, 15 pages, your executive summary, but it gave me enough stuff that I threw in here. This is a quote. This says, "This plan extends that ethic to the private lands in Teton County, which comprise only 3% of the land area, but are where most of the community lives and works." Okay? So out of the 2.5 million acres in Teton County, 76,000 of them are private property. Only 3%. And of that 76,000 acres, only 18,000 are even available for development. So 0.7% of all of Teton County is affected by this plan of everyone telling those who own that land what they can and can't do. We and the community are over and over used so that we and the community can tell those who own that private property what they can and can't do with their property. Okay? Here's one example of many, many examples, but in your comprehensive plan and the executive summary, quote, "Realizing our vision requires proactively planning for what we want. Rural open spaces and high quality complete neighborhoods by identifying where we want them and what we want them to look like." So we, meaning the planners, will decide for the private property owners not only what their property will be used for, be it open space or high density housing, they will also decide what it will look like. So what we want is imposed upon those who own that private property. I think there's a challenge there, isn't there? Okay? Making decisions collectively about how private property will and will not be used in the future. Regionalizing. Regionalizing is the process of getting, instead of having a county board of commissioners you report to, well, let's get a tri-county board. Let's get higher and higher to where, who are we actually accountable to? It's hard enough as it is to have some accountability with the current elected officials, but to have these boards, who knows where they meet and who they are, that are regionalized, okay? A quote straight out of your comprehensive plan, quote, "Consideration and cooperation with greater region." Now you look at some of this stuff, I know the LDRs are mentioned earlier, but you guys have International Fire Code citations in your comp plan. You have International Building Code of 2006. And you have, what's the other one? International Energy Conservation Codes, all adopted by Teton County. And you go, now wait a second. These international codes, they may or may not be legitimate, but I would have a question. Why do we have all these international codes? Why is an international code determining what we're going to do in our county with our energy or whatever building standards, etc.? Losing local sovereignty to unelected officials and special interest groups. Grant money, we've already talked about that. The money is the process there. Precautionary principle is an interesting, kind of a wordy definition. If there's a suspected risk to the environment in the absence of consensus as to its likelihood or impact, the burden of proof falls on the party implementing the action. You must prove a negative. When I brought this up in Laramie, they said we have the perfect example. We have this Casper Aquifer, and there are about 50 homes that are out on this Casper Aquifer, and some environmentalists came along and said, you're polluting the aquifer with your septic tanks. And they spent a lot of money and got someone hired who said, no, you're not. And so they had these conflicting scientists who said, oh, there may or may not be. But in the precautionary principle, if there's not a consensus, who wins? The side of precaution. And so those people have to prove that it's not polluting the aquifer. And since they have one environmentalist who says you are, there's not consensus there. And so has the government taken from them their property? No, they still own the land. But have they? Yes, you better believe they've taken it from them because they can't live there anymore. And what do they have to do? They have to move into the city. And can they sell their land for any value? No, because it's not even livable anymore. That's happening in Laramie, okay?
Is it actually polluted? Has that been proven?
It hasn't been proven, but it's been accused. That's the whole point of the precautionary principle. Once there's an accusation, if they can't come to a consensus between professionals, then it's precautionary. You have to err on the side of precaution. What's that?
Professionals are paid.
Professionals are paid. You better believe it. Okay? Now, the way I related this to your comp plan is the LDRs, the Land Development Regulations. So how many windows can you have? If you have 8 and you're only supposed to have 7 for that square footage, what do you have to do? You have to pay. You have to pay money. Wait a second. Why? Well, because that could, I don't know, you're using resources that a window doesn't insulate as well as a wall, so you need to pay. Someone was telling me, I was talking to Bob, I think, but there's this precautionary principle is really heavy in the LDR. Some people are paying as much as $90,000, I think I heard. $90,000 extra just to comply with the LDRs. Yep, legalize, you better believe it is, yep. Okay, so is that alive and well? I think it is. Consensus. We all agree, we and the community all agree that we need to take care of our county, so we must adopt the comprehensive plan, right? Because we all agree with that. Who here is, okay, so here's a question for you guys. Who here is in support of protecting our clean water? I raise a hand. All of us, right? And you came to this meeting, and we had a sign-in sheet. This is a public meeting. You had a sign-in sheet, and I go back and report to my boss the next day. Consensus. Everyone agreed they wanted the clean water and the regulations that go with it. Let's go. Let's get to work. The regulations that come with it is the key phrase there, isn't it? There's an implied consensus. There is no consensus. And there may be even some dissension in that meeting. But what happens? The report is brought back as consensus. They're all here. They're good to go. I was involved in that in Evanston with an interesting, personally, I had that happen to me. I thought, wow, this is what they're doing. Public-private partnerships, non-government organizations, talked about that earlier. Just so you know, in the locations I've been throughout the state, you have the same consultants by name as some of the other counties in the state. You have the same groups that are organized and working to get access to money here in the county. I'll leave that up to you I don't want to point out any specific groups. I'll let you look at that. The point to make here is we're using taxpayer money to finance a joint venture between the government and private industry. That's a challenge. I think that crosses some lines there. Okay, the last one, and then 2 more slides. Control sprawl. We don't want to sprawl and get outside, okay? So, where's my comment here? This is an actual UN treaty. There's a biodiversity treaty that was this close to getting passed in the Senate. And this little land, you'll notice red is little to no human use. Jackson's right in there, probably in the middle of that big red blob. Yellow is the buffer zones, and this map really isn't good. It doesn't do justice, it's not fair, but there are some green normal uses. There's some tiny ones wherever there's big cities. That's your green normal use. And what's that to do? We got to control sprawl. We can't let people live out on the land. We have to get them into the cities. Jefferson had to say, when we get piled upon one another in large cities, as in Europe, we shall become as corrupt as Europe. So let me give you one last example from your comp plan. Has 3 quotes out of it. By directing the majority of growth into areas of existing infrastructure and services, which comprise only about 7% of private land being 3%, right? So we're all the way down to like 0.002%. We can preserve open spaces of ecological and scenic value while also allowing for enhanced housing, economic development, social, and civic opportunities, unquote. So it sounds like the planners are telling me, a private property owner, that my land will be good for ecological and scenic value, and that someone else's land will be good for economic development, just depending on the plan. If I'm good to go, I'm one of the 7% of that private property, then I'm happy, because the government just made me a winner. But if I'm out, I'm not in that pre-approved growth area of the 7% of the private land, then I'm dead. The value of my property is gone, isn't it? It's over. I was just made a loser by the government.
I use the term part of the chosen.
Part of the chosen. Okay, quote, continued legacy of concentrating 60% of growth on only 7% of private land. Okay, that's right out of your comprehensive plan. 60% of all growth will only be on 7% of the private land, so you better hope you own 7% of, if you want to develop it or have any value in it, you better hope you own 7% of the private land. the chosen 7%, right? And lastly, quote, ensure we house over 65% of the workforce locally, unquote. So if housing is only approved on 7% of all private land, and then the plan calls for 65% of all workers to be locally housed, then the obvious solution is high-density housing units, specific areas where workers can live, or as the plan calls it, complete neighborhoods. Okay? Once again, if your developer owns some of that 7%, life is good. And it's even better if you were on the advisory board and were one of the development people who own that land. Okay? I don't know if that's happened here, but it's happened in other places. The proof's in the pudding. I'm not here to point out people. That's happened. People have been on the boards that are the stakeholders who show up to the meetings and devise all the plans for the use of the private property. And it just so happens that all the benefits tilt their way to the tune of millions of dollars.
Did you notice that Mark specifically used the word middle class? So he...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. And we're at your favorite part and mine too, the end. Let me give you, that was all step one, over and over was step one. Know the organizations, know the plan, know the tactics. Now let's apply that to the Teton County comp plan. I'll give you the last two steps. Inform others. Is it important that this type of information is spread for other people to know about? You bet. It's very important so other people know what's going on. What's Agenda 21 and how is it alive and well right here in Teton County? And lastly, become active in the solutions. The real answer is take what you know and take what you're teaching other people and show up at city council meetings, show up at county commission meetings, show up at planning and zoning meetings, and apply true principles and apply your knowledge of what's going on to that in order to stand for freedom and stand for private property rights. Okay? Does that take work? You bet it takes work. Does someone maybe even label you a conspiracy theorist? Yeah, maybe so. It's going to take work, and people may not like what you say, but if you say what's right and what's true, you're on the right side. So, that was kind of, the last part was quick and dirty, but hopefully you learned some things. And like I said, if you want to put your name on an email address or email list, we'll get a list started. Put your name and email, and I will send this your way so you can use it and learn from it and hopefully share with other people. Thanks for having me come out.